Cynthia, I have the microphone in my hand. Can you hear okay? Okay. That's okay. He said that a short conversation with me is a long conversation, but I think he may have just proved me wrong. So in the meantime, our debt presentation tonight is to let everybody know where we stand financially from debt. And the presentation panel tonight is Hilltop Financial Securities. They are the financial advisor for the town. They have been our financial advisor for a number of years. And with us tonight, we have Cinda McInerney, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that, Regional Managing Director. Abby Jeffers, you guys can wave or whatever. Abby Jeffers, Senior Vice President. Megan Highland, Vice President. These are the people we rely on every single time we go to borrowing to provide us with the advice that we need to make sure that we're doing the best thing for the community. So at this time, I'm going to pass it off to Cinda. Please take a minute to welcome them. Okay, I'll reiterate that for the microphone, for those in the audience at home, and for those who cannot hear. We will have a question and answer session at the end. Please hold your questions till then, because as we go through the slides, each slide is a little bit different. So what you may hear or see on slide 1 may be answered for your question on slide 2. So Mr. Cavey will be moderating at the end of the presentation, and thank you very much.
Well, so I want to start by telling you, I work at Hilltop. Okay, the three of us work at Hilltop Securities in Boston, and what we do, I want to talk for 1 minute about what we do. We give advice to cities and towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on how to issue debt, how to structure it, basically how to fit it into their budgets. And at the same time, we give advice on how to at least maintain your credit rating, if not improve it. I've been in the municipal bond business for 50 years, which I know is hard to believe. I don't look like I could possibly have done that, but I have, much to my dismay. And I'm also a town meeting member in my town, and I'm on my own town's finance committee. So I've been around municipal finance for a really long time, and I'm still learning things every day. And one of the things that I've noticed in my town is that in a town meeting is one of the hardest things about municipal finance is the terminology. You know, and it's because we all know after working at doing this, we all joke that it's not rocket science. It's just that the terminology is hard to understand. Something like debt service. I don't know how many of you know what debt service means, for example. Do you all know what debt service means? Okay, so I'm glad some of you do, but some of you I can see heads shaking no. Some of you don't know what it means, and rather than go right into what I want to talk about, I want to make sure you know what I'm talking about when I use terms like that, like debt service. So on the back page of your handout, we put a glossary of some of the basic terms that are going to come up in the discussion tonight so that you can understand the town's debt and you can understand some of the other issues surrounding the town's capacity to issue debt so that you can all make decisions about and consider what the town is looking at for debt in its future. So some of the, and I'm going to have to wear my glasses because I can't see anymore. So municipal bond, we all know it's like an IOU. It's debt issued by the city or the town, and it's paid back over a number of years, the maximum term of which is set by law. So equipment can only go for 5, it can only go, most of the laws in Massachusetts are based on the useful life of whatever it is you're issuing. So for school construction, land acquisition, major building improvements, those can all go for up to 30 years. For some equipment, if it only can go police cruisers, they don't even last 5 years. You wouldn't issue that for 5 years. You might issue that short term. So when you structure debt, you have to structure all the debt by the different terms based on the useful life of all the different kinds of projects. And you put the debt together and you sell it as a single bond issue. The single bond issue could have as many as could have 100 different projects inside it, but each is structured separately. And they're set to pay back over whatever terms they all pay back over. The payback is called they amortize, or they mature over a certain number of years. So they might mature over 10 years, or they might amortize over 10 years. Principal is paid back annually, And interest is paid back semi-annually. That's the general way that municipal bonds are issued and paid back. Debt service is the principal and interest combined on the bonds. So in a single year, the town has to appropriate, you do at a town meeting, a category called for debt service on all the different funds in town, for enterprise funds, for the general fund, for the CPA. You have to appropriate a certain amount of principal and then the interest that's due in the next fiscal year. So we're ending fiscal 24. You're about to go into fiscal 25, and that's the budget that you're working on if you're town meeting members. Starts July 1. You're going to have an item in your warrant called debt service, and that's for principal and interest on short-term and long-term bonds. Bonds are usually issued and paid back over a number of years. Short-term notes are referred to as bond anticipation notes, and they're paid back usually for 1 year, up to 1 year at a time, and they pay back, and they can be renewed. That means at the maturity date, when they come due in 1 year, you would pay them with another note that you issue to pay off the principal, and all you had to do was appropriate the interest. So that's a lot. You don't need to know all that, except for we're going to show you numbers on all of your debt, all of your interest, all of the principal by fund, and we want to make sure that you understand what you're looking at. Some of the other, we went over, so bonds, usually you can structure bonds, So you can structure bonds so it looks like a mortgage payment. We all know what that looks like. Every year's payment is approximately the same, and every year's payment includes principal and interest, but together it looks like the same amount of payment in every single year through the 30-year term of the mortgage. Otherwise, it's issued as equal principal, and principal and interest combined, debt service, declines from year to year because you're paying off principal, so you're only paying interest on the amount that's left as you work your way through, say, a 20-year bond term. I'll tell you one interesting thing that I think is interesting right now. It's an aside, but I'll tell it to you quickly. We've got an inverted yield curve in the market right now, and a 1-year note is actually paying, usually a 1-year bond, the yield curve goes up. The bond maturing in year 1 has a lower interest rate than the bond maturing in year 30. Each year has a different interest rate on it. And right now we've got an inverted yield curve. So the bond maturing in year 1 is a higher interest rate than the true interest rate on a 20-year bond. So we're seeing an acceleration of debt. But you can only do that if you can afford to do and accelerate debt. So what I want to do, let me see if there's any other terms on this back page to tell you about. Oh yeah, I definitely have to say something about Proposition 2.5. I don't know that anybody a lot of people I know, a lot of my friends don't have a clue how Prop 2.5 really works. Prop 2.5 has a lot of different limits. One of the limits is the primary limit, and that's 2.5% of the full value of property in the town. So if you've got $5.8 billion worth of value in the town, your primary levy limit is 2.5% of that, or $25 per thousand. But if you've looked at your property tax bill, it's much lower than $25 per thousand of assessed value. It's lower than that because when Prop 2.5 was passed in 1980, everybody was at a $25 tax rate. And what happened was the growth in the value of property increased faster than 2.5%. And so they had another rule that you could only grow by 2.5% plus new growth. And over time, there's been a huge disparity between that lower amount that's been only allowed to grow by 2.5% plus new growth. Let's say your tax levy can grow by 3% a year, but your property values have grown by 10% a year. Let's just say that for now. So that secondary limit is called secondary limit, or the lower limit, or silly enough, it's called the maximum levy limit on the tax recap. The maximum levy limit is lower than the primary levy limit. In order to raise money for debt or for operations over and above the maximum levy limit, which is the lower levy limit, you have to do either an operating override, or you have to do a debt exclusion, or you have to do a capital exclusion. That's the only way to tax yourselves more to pay for what you want. If you can't afford it, because you're capped out at the lower levy limit. And what you'll see in a couple minutes is that the town is basically capped out at the lower levy limit. You've done debt exclusions for part of a fire station, and you've done capital exclusion, a debt exclusion for the high school. And those you've done on top of the lower levy limit, But you still got lots of capacity if you want to keep taxing yourselves, to tax yourselves to do more, but you'd have to do it with a vote of town meeting and then another vote by referendum of the residents of the town. So we're going to show you what your debt looks like and what your budget looks like and what kinds of debt you have that you're contemplating and what the cost of that would be and how that might pan out. And so it gives you a lot of food for thought, because it doesn't look like you can necessarily do all of what you're talking about unless you want to start doing debt exclusions. So we've gone through all that. The debt limit in Massachusetts is something completely different. The debt, it's not, and so we talk about exempt debt and non-exempt debt. And then we're talking about inside the debt limit or outside the debt limit. The debt limit in Massachusetts, which is silly because most people aren't even going to ever issue as much debt as they could pursuant to Massachusetts law, the debt limit, which allows you to authorize debt for up to 5% of your assessed value or your equalized assessed value as determined by the state. You can even do a double debt limit, which is 10%. We'll show you a debt statement in a couple minutes so you can see how far away the town is from how much debt you actually could authorize. It's not a question of how much you can authorize, but you have to satisfy a debt, make a debt statement in every time you authorize debt and want to issue it so that you can see that you're within the debt limits. The thing about the debt limit is that there's a lot of debt that doesn't count against the debt limit, so that makes it that you could even issue more debt if you felt like it. So but the debt limit is different than the primary levy limit. Prop 2.5 is a tax levy limit, and the debt limit is a debt limit. They're two different things. And so the kinds of debt that aren't subject to the debt limit are water, since it's self-supporting, sewer, since it's self-supporting. You've got enterprise funds that pay for water debt, and a sewer enterprise fund that pays for sewer debt. You've got a CPA fund that pays for CPA debt. You've got a golf course fund that pays for golf course debt. And then you've got a general fund that pays for general fund debt, but some of that general fund debt is excluded from Prop 2.5, so you pay more for that. But so the debt that's self-supporting doesn't count against the debt limit. Only the debt that's not self-supporting does. And when you authorize the high school, if it's got Mass School Building Authority grant money coming in toward the cost of the project, which is what you'd have if you consider a middle school or other schools down the road, those schools don't count against the debt limit either. But they do count against the lower levy limit. The debt service on those projects counts against the lower levy limit. So, the big projects generally in a lot of towns have to be accomplished with debt exclusions. They can't be done if you're right up against the lower maximum levy limit, which is calculated each year when you set your tax rate in November. So let's go back to, we'll go through this. So we're off that page. That was the last page. This is how we issue debt too. We work from the delivery date back to where we are now and figure out how much time we need to get it done. So this is the town's debt. We're on page 2. This is all of the town's debt right here. This is how much is currently outstanding. You can't see the bottom of the page on this chart. Is there any way that you can show the totals on the bottom? Yeah, because that's really important. So this is right here, it's column A. I still can't now. Oh, now we see it. It's the total of all debt. That's general fund, school, debt exclusions, water, sewer, CPA, golf. That's this column, and you can see it's 11 million of debt service. This is principal and interest. 11 million in fiscal 24. Whoops, did I do that? And then it starts to decline. It goes down 10 million, and down here in your 2052, it's down to 1 million. But that's all debt. So what we did was, and the totals you can see on the bottom, you've got in all debt $145 million of outstanding debt right now, for all purposes, inside and outside Prop 2.5. Then from this is all funds. So what we're doing is, here's your sewer. We're subtracting out the sewer debt service Because what we want to do is look at the general fund only for purposes of this discussion, because it's the general fund that's primarily subject to Prop 2.5. So we're taking out the sewer debt service. That's what you've got in your sewer enterprise fund debt service. Here's your water, we're taking it out. The sewer only adds to 6.3 million. The water is, if that's the, yeah, water adds up to 15, almost 16 million. Do you all see it? It's in column C. Then the CPA, we're taking out the CPA, we're subtracting another 3 million. And then here's the general and school debt. And this includes the exempt debt service for both general, the fire station component that's subject to Prop 2.5, and the, well, actually, that's the debt exclusion for fire is in there. And then school debt exclusion's in there, so non-fire, non-debt excluded debt, and excluded debt is in column E. So we're taking out in column F everything that's excluded. So we're talking about here, this is what's subject to Prop 2.5. This is what is in your budget that there's no offsetting tax revenue or water or sewer revenue or CPA revenue to offset it. This has to fit inside with the rest of your operating budget. This is your debt service for non-debt excluded debt and non-self-supporting debt, and this is what's subject to the lower levy limit. So that's something that's important to understand, because when you look at town meeting, at town meeting you're appropriating this much debt. For fiscal 25, it drops to 10.9 million. In fiscal 24, you had to appropriate 11 point whatever that says there. I can't read it without my glasses on. So we're going to look at the next page and keep this discussion going. Am I making any sense?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll keep going. So this is the column we left off on the page before. This is column A. This is your existing general fund exempt debt service. Oh, this is your existing exempt debt service. So we're going to show you what's happening with the exempt situation right now. The town has short-term notes outstanding right now, bond anticipation notes. They're maturing in June. We have to renew them. We're going to renew them. The plan is renew them to November and then take them out with bonds. This is that bond right here. It's going to be $5.3 million of bonds. Once you issue a note, you take the proceeds of the note, the bond anticipation note, and you use it for the project. You're in the middle of, this is a variety of different projects. You're in the middle of these projects. So they have to get bonded. That's how you pay off the note. You have to issue a bond ultimately. The bond pays back the short-term one-year note, which you only did to get the project going and maybe to get some other debt to fall off. And then you sell a bond to take it out. So this is the bond in November. This is the remaining piece of the fire station that is non-exempt. This first column is non-exempt.
It's non-exempt.
This column has a mistake on it. I was thinking it when we left the prior page. This column should say, if you've got a pen, please write this down. Existing, just cross off the word exempt. Existing general fund debt service. This is the amount that's subject to the lower levy limit. We apologize. We were messing with this to make it user-friendly last night, and I guess it's not user-friendly enough. So existing general fund debt subject to the lower levy limit. It's the same as the prior page. Then this is the fire station remaining piece that's not debt excluded. And then this one right here. This is the November bond. This is the fire station. And this is the total existing and currently underway debt issues. So we've tried to make it clear. This isn't really optional. The fire station is half built. You've already sold, I think, $12 million of bonds for the fire station. This is the remaining $2.3 million that you're going to sell that's subject to the general fund lower levy limit, not debt excluded. And here's the bands that are outstanding that have to be taken out with bonds. So this is debt you're already committed to. This is the cost of it. It's $3,112,000, and that's fiscal 24, so that's not changing. But you can see it jumps up in fiscal 26 when you issue the bonds in November of 24. And we're going to push so that the first impact is here, but it jumps up here, and that's what you're then living with. What we did, then this is what's subject to Prop 2.5, lower levy limit. It starts at 3.1 in 24, the year we're in now. It's going to go to 2.8 because it's dropping off a little bit in fiscal 25, but then it goes right back up to 3.2, and it stays about like that. But you're bringing on what we then talked about. You've got a capital plan that we were looking at that shows about $10 million of capital projects a year for the next 5 years. We thought that you might want to see what that does to what you have to do. It's the same number in each of these columns. They're just coming on at 3.5%. Level debt service like a mortgage payment that pushes principal out a little bit, but it makes it so you can have even annual payments of debt service. If you did that for 5 years, or if you do it for any, you can see it's going to add on 700,000, and you'll see how you don't have 700,000 room in your budget right now to put that in there without giving up something else. But if you were to do that, which is what the capital plan shows all that, and that's not even talking about a potential, I know there's a discussion about a middle school project, the local share of which is, I think, about 66 million. We're going to show you what that looks like in a second, too. But the capital plan right now for debt that would not be envisioned as debt excluded, 10 million a year, that would show you, that would look like 700,000 a year for 20 years, level debt service, and here it is. It takes what was happening over here that you're committed to right now, and it jumps it up by fiscal 26, that's 24, 25, 26. It's 4 million, whoops. It's 4 million in 26, and it goes up to 5 million in 28. And then it starts, 5.6 million, and then it starts to come down some. It's a big number to try to fit in when you've got no remaining capacity under the lower levy limit. We're going to show you what the levy limits look like. We'll go on to the next page. So we highlighted, this is your Prop 2.5 tax levy limits. The primary levy limit, you can see in the blue at the top. Are we on this page? Is it possible to make this page bigger? Oh, I probably did. I shouldn't touch that, right? Oh, did I? Here, you want this?
You hold that and speak into it.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, I really screwed it up. Okay, here we go. Do you mind lowering it just a teeny tiny? Yep, lower it just a little so we can see the definition. Primary levy limit is 2.5% of the equalized valuation of town property. The town's property is valued, the equalized valuation is set by the state at $5.2 billion. And the primary levy limit, you can see at 2.5% of what it was in each of these years. Your primary levy limit was 107 million. In fiscal 24, it's almost 150 million. Your actual tax levy limit is down here in green. That's the maximum levy limit. That's the 2.5% plus new growth each year over the prior year's levy limit. And it started back in 1981 where that started to be the calculation as to what that would be. Your maximum levy limit or your lower levy limit is in fiscal 24, 84 million. So you can do debt exclusions all day long and you can tax so that you could tax 150 million in 1 year with debt exclusions. That would support an awful lot of debt because the debt service is just 1 year. And you could, this is the tax levy, has 1 year's worth of debt service in it. Here's the tax levy. Right now you're taxing 84,476,000 and your limit is 84,534,000. You got $57,000 left that you could spend and tax under the lower levy limit. You're not the only community that's got their back up against the wall with regard to the lower levy limit. It's why you voted to exclude the debt service on the high school and why you voted to exclude part of the debt service on the fire station. But you've got a lot of decisions coming up in the future. You know, that chart before showed all the $10 million amounts. That doesn't fit. The debt service was 700,000. You got 57,000. You got a lot of things competing for that 57,000. The entire operating budget is competing for that 57,000. You know, you've got water and sewer enterprise funds that pay their own way. CPA pays its own way. I think the golf is paying its own way. But the general fund is either debt excluded or it's being supported by the lower levy limit. Unless you do an operating override, and then that could, I mean, you could always do that too. One more thing that's important to understand about yourselves, we can go to the next page. Here's a summary of your budget for the last 5 years. And in the budget, you can see, I'll look up here. So, this is the budget summary, and it includes the enterprise debt, the enterprise category, not just debt, but it's got total debt interest right here. That's debt principal and interest. This is debt service. You can see that it's remained somewhat constant, but that's what includes, and that's what you've got on a prior page, all the enterprise debt, water, sewer, CPA, and golf. It's all in there. And it also includes the debt exclusion debt. What you can see here is at the bottom, this is that same number we've been looking at. Here's the $3,112,000 of general fund debt service subject to the lower levy limit. That was the number in fiscal 24 and a couple of those pages and the one page where I made the mistake. That's the $3,112,000. If this is your budget in 24, where's 24? Here's 24. We took out the enterprise category. So if we take this $3 million and we divide it by the total budget minus, so basically the general fund budget, and not the and took out the enterprise debt, the percent of debt in that budget that's for the non-excluded and non-self-supporting debt is only 2.5%. That 2.49% at the bottom of the page. That's a really low placeholder for debt service under Prop 2.5's lower levy limit. What the town, what you might consider going forward is figuring out how to make that a larger placeholder. But it's easier said than done. Right now, one of the things, and can you raise this up just a teeny tiny? I mean, it's hard to do. In most communities, you know, you might have different kinds of debt policies associated with this. And I know that the town is in the middle of further developing its capital plan and working on fiscal policies with, I think it's is it the Collins Center? So there are a number of different kinds of policies for financial reserves and then policies with regard to other kinds of, for debt, there's different kinds of how much debt do you want to have, how much should debt service be as a percent of the budget. Generally, debt service as a percent of the budget is usually more like 5 to 10%. If you could go back in time, you'd probably see that Stoughton might have had it as a larger placeholder, but by not issuing debt, they didn't need it, and it slowly whittled down, and now it's 2.5%, and to get it back up is going to be hard. I mean, for a long time, one of the things the town's also done that is something that it's going to need to, that it's been under pressure to deal with, is that you've used, and you can see these footnotes here, a certain amount of free cash has been used in each of the last several years, and it was larger than this to balance the budget. So the big mantra in municipal finance in the last several years, ever since the Great Recession really, is to have structural balance. That means that your ongoing revenues equal your ongoing expenditures year after year after year. I mean, you can gather from what I've said so far that Prop 2.5 is really unforgiving. If you don't balance your budget structurally in 1 year, the idea that you could, what are you going to do the next year? You're reliant on producing right now free cash, regenerating it so that you can have it to balance the budget. But if you wanted to make to make this 2.5% bigger, one way is to appropriate more debt service than you need. But who wants to do that? Because you're under a lot of pressure. So you've got, you know, the town's got challenges going forward with the development of a comprehensive plan for all the debt that it wants to issue after it prioritizes further what it really needs and the source of revenue to pay it back. We've got more information for you. So we put this together last November. When you issue debt, you have to satisfy legal requirements so that bond counsel knows that it was legally authorized and that it's tax exempt. You issue tax exempt debt. It's exempt from state and federal taxation. And in order to do that, they have to make sure that you're complying with state law with regard to that debt limit I was talking about before. Here's what the debt limit is. Here's your equalized valuation we were talking about before, $5.2 billion. The debt limit is 5%, which is $259 million. You could have $259 million of outstanding debt. You've currently got, your total outstanding debt at the time was $105 million that was outstanding, and another $38 million that was authorized on the books but not yet issued as debt, as bonds. So that total, the gross debt was $144 million, but you could issue almost twice that much, have almost twice that much outstanding. But from that $144 million that you've got, authorized and outstanding, $67 million doesn't count against the debt limit. This is what I was saying before. It doesn't count because it's either for water or sewer or school construction. None of that Chapter 70 debt for school construction, that doesn't count against the debt limit. And then what's authorized and not yet issued that's outside the debt limit, that doesn't count either. So I'm subtracting $67 million and another $16 million, which leaves only $83 million. Well, that's $83 million being subtracted, which leaves only $61 million that is subject to the debt limit. So the remaining borrowing capacity right now is $200 million, but you'd have to do it with debt exclusions, the way it looks right now. If you go to the next page, that's the backup for all the debt of the town that's currently not subject to the debt limit, whether it's authorized unissued or whether it's outstanding. You can see exactly what it is, and if you look at it closely, you can see school projects, mass clean water trust deals, septic system betterments, water department equipment, water treatment facility. All of that is self-supporting with water rates and sewer rates, so it doesn't count against the debt limit. So the debt limit's not the problem. Prop 2.5 is the problem. And planning for the future is, I don't want to call it a problem because it's a challenge. Everybody's got the same challenge. Every community is dealing with the same thing. Right now, it used to be that we only looked at historic trends. We're now looking at the future. We got to plan 5, 10, 20 years ahead right now and have a vision for that. And every town should have that. And so that's part and parcel of what this next chart is going to look at a little bit. Yeah, somebody put that in. I don't know. I agree with that statement. So here is now this is the exempt. We're calling it exempt. We're calling it not outside the debt limit. It's exempt from Prop 2.5. It's not exempt from the debt limit. We're calling it exempt. Exempt debt and excluded debt is the same thing. It's excluded from Prop 2.5 lower levy limit. So here we are with the exempt. This is your existing general fund exempt debt. This is comprised of, I think outstanding, I saw today about $55 million for the high school and the $12 million for the fire station. Well, it's 60, this is not the new school. This is the existing high school. So this is the outstanding. And that, the existing, and so when you do the debt exclusions, you agree to tax yourselves more. Here's the tax impact per $1,000 of assessed value. So if your house is worth $500,000 or it's worth $300,000, you can do the math. The remaining, here is the remaining $4.4 million fire station. 65% of that project was exempt. This is what has not yet been sold. So that's $4.4 million. That's the debt service, and the impact of that is 4 cents per thousand. The existing This existing over here, that's the existing outstanding exempt debt, plus the fire station that hasn't been issued yet. Oopsie. This is, that's this number, and this is the impact. About 80 cents or 84 cents for a number of years per $1,000 of assessed value. That you're living with or will be soon. That's a given. Here's the school project. I think it was, we were told 114 million, the local share is 66 million. So we ran 66 million for 30 years, level debt service, and what rate did we use? 4.5%. We used 4.5% for 30 years. We sold some 30-year debt today, and it was at a 405. So we're assuming that 4.5, we try to be conservative and manage expectations. The impact of that would be $4 million a year once it goes on. As a debt exclusion, it would be 80, what is that number, 61 cents? 61 cents per thousand. So if we add up all of the debt exclusions and the middle school, here's the impact. And altogether, it's 80 cents, but it would jump up to $1.45 per thousand. And here's the impact for a $500,000 single-family home. These other 84 cents and 61 and 4 cents and all that, that's per $1,000 of assessed value of a home. And this is the impact for a $500,000 home. It would start at $400, which is where it is in fiscal '24. When you bring on what's happening with the remaining fire station, it's going to jump up to $420. And then when you start to do more, it's going to jump up to $725 for annually for a home valued at $500,000. We just wanted to show that because we know you're thinking about it.
Cinda, could you just make a clarification that it's not for the high school, it's for the pending middle school?
Yes, did I say high school? Sorry. South Elementary. I have a pen if ever anybody wants to borrow it and write it down there. So you can tell, I mean, generally what we do is, and as I apologize not doing that, that's what the school was. Generally, we just look at the project cost. We don't really weigh in on whether or not you should or shouldn't do a project. We weigh in on how it's going to impact your budgets, how it's going to impact, and how it's going to impact your credit. And the credit is a whole nother story, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But so, I think this is, so I was talking about this right here, estimated local share of the $114 million middle school, the local share is estimated at $66 million, just to be clear. I should have put my glasses on. So on the next page, we're up to, I think we're basically almost done, but this page is really important. So when you issue the debt, it's really important that you maintain your credit rating. Did I skip a page? Oh, I did skip a page. I know what page I skipped. We ran some sample numbers for you to see, so you could just see what happens with debt excluded money. We just ran debt excluded schedules for you to see, and the tax impact on both per thousand and per $500,000 home for 10 million over 30 years, 25 million over 30 years, 50 million over 30 years, and 75 million over 30 years. They're structured like a mortgage. You can't just take the 10 million and multiply it times 2, and that's what it would be for 20 million. You can't do it that way because of how level debt is actually calculated. But we gave you these samples so that you could have that, so you could think about, you know, wow, you know, what do we want to do in the future, and what's that going to cost us? I do want to talk just briefly about your credit rating, because the town's current credit rating is a AA2. And the town worked hard. The town's got a good financial position right now. The town worked hard to go from AA3, which is a little close to A1. So the rating categories, we didn't print them in here. AAA is the best rating you can get. And it stands alone in the AAA category. There's just one number in one grade. It's AAA. In the AA category, which is one grade below, there's AA1, AA2, and AA3. Below that is A1, A2, A3. Below that is BAA1, BAA2, and BAA3. And below that is junk bond. So almost everybody in Massachusetts is a very wealthy state. Almost everybody in Massachusetts is in the AA category. Stoughton is rated by Moody's Investor Service. The other big rating agency is Standard & Poor's. Moody's rates the town right now AA2. And they raised it from AA3. AA3 is too close to the A category. It matters a lot what you're rated because it's part of what determines the rate at which you borrow. And the higher the rate at which you borrow for debt that goes out a long time, like 30 years, it compounds a lot. I mean, on something like a $66 million project, over 30 years, the difference of 1% could be like $50 million of extra interest costs. So it's very important for a lot of reasons, not just the rate at which you borrow, because that's a lot of that is determined on what's going on in the marketplace. But the rating is really critical. The AA, that you've got a AA2 is something that you want to protect. That fact that you're using free cash to balance the budget instead of ongoing revenues, and you've managed to whittle that down so that you've really got a true structurally balanced budget. That's part of what the rating agency is saying. You have to stop with this extra money, because in a bad time, you can't necessarily regenerate all the free cash, or you might need to use the free cash for something, in which case you're expected to replenish it so that you've always got reserves on hand. With regard to the way that the rating agency looks at the town, your financial position is good, but you can't just use that, or you drop back down to AA3, which is pretty close to A1. I mean, if anything, as part of the long-term 10, 20-year plan, it would be to strengthen the credit, because what happens when you strengthen the credit and what happens with the stronger credit is you've got more investors that want to invest in the town. The value of property goes up. You've got more flexibility to do whatever you want to do in terms of, attracting investors, which is how you're going to have the revenue to support the debt that you want to issue for the capital plan and to support the operations. One of the things I want to tell you, when people look at your debt, they're not just looking at the amount of your outstanding debt. They're looking at your unfunded pension liability. You're part of Norfolk County. That debt amortizes. The unfunded pension liability that has to be amortized is paying off, I think it was 2031 or 32. It's somewhat aggressive. What's happening with that, though, it could be lengthened, but that's up to the county. But the problem with it is that it ascends a lot faster than 2.5 plus new growth per year. It's growing faster than your levy is allowed to grow. Then the other thing that's part of when the rating agency looks at your debt profile, they're then looking at your share of the county system, which I think is about $45 million. But you've got unfunded OPEB liability, other post-employment benefit liability, which that's 100% the town, primarily health insurance for the future. That's not funded yet for all employees alive but no longer employed people. That I think is 145 million, if I remember correctly. So you've got more unfunded pension and OPEB liability than you do outstanding all-fund debt. And that's where the rating agencies look at whether or not you've got high debt. A lot of other profiles that they're looking at, is how quickly do you amortize debt? So far, pretty good. That's not a problem. How much is debt service as a percent of budget? It's certainly not too high. If anything, it's too low, like we discussed earlier. They look at debt per capita. That is okay. You've done your debt exclusions. That's in an okay realm. And they look at debt as a percent of the value of property in town, and that's very low. So those are some of the basic metrics. Then they look at, in addition, when they're rating the town, they're looking at what's happening with the local economy, what's happening with the state economy, what's happening with the national economy. We've got inflation right now. They're looking at all of that, your local, those, and the local demographics, like per capita income, household income. They're also looking at financial performance. They want to see primarily free cash, unassigned fund balance, stabilization fund balances. You look good there. We talked about debt, and they want, and then they look at the state laws that govern how you can operate. The state doesn't let you get out of sync. I mean, when you set the tax rate and tax levy, you have to have a balanced budget by then, even if you're using free cash. So they don't let you get out of shape. But I hope that this gave you an idea as to what you're facing when you consider non-excluded debt and what you're looking at when you're considering debt that would have to be excluded, as to what the impact is. Is it the priority, you know, and how, you know, in our discussions with the town, you know, we've talked about, you know, developing a long-term pro forma of revenues and expenditures that builds and puts the capital plan right in it so you can see. It takes a lot of work, but that's where a lot of communities are at that stage where that's what they've got to do to figure out how they want to move forward. So I think you told me good luck.
Thank you very much. We're going to take just a 30-second break. If anybody needs water, there's some water up front. And if you can gather your questions, Mr. Cavey is going to be moderating the questions, so all questions will go through Mr. Cavey. Okay? Just 1 minute. Seventh inning stretch for those who may need it.
Thanks, guys. So if you don't mind taking your seats for a moment, just in order to get as many questions answered as possible, I'd just like a raise of hands to see who's looking to ask a question. If it's only a couple people, then it's be quick. So we only have one question, it looks like. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's pretty reasonable. So if it's okay with you guys, what I'd like to do, just to make sure that everyone gets a chance to answer their questions, get their questions answered, and also that we're able to get out at a reasonable time, I'm going to set a time limit on the length of time that you can ask a question. So your time period will be about 5 minutes. I'll have a clock running. If the questions take longer than that, we'll have to move on to the next person. So it's about 20 to 25 minutes total. Okay, so we'll start on the, you also want one as well? Ask a question? Perfect, thank you very much. So we'll just move that down to 4 minutes apiece. So we'll start from the left, move towards my right. So the first is, if I'm not mistaken, if you don't mind just raising your hand again, I think it's Mr. Zemanian. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Precinct 1. You want me to try that one? No. Just real clarifying question. I think I heard it clearly tonight. That there is a limit to both ends of our debt exclusion capacity, correct? And that limit's somewhere in the roughly $140 million. Am I getting that right? What we have remaining?
Yeah, now that would be 140 million in annual, so you could have annual debt service of 140 million.
Correct.
So times 30 years, whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
The second question is sort of the real question. So we know we have the capacity to do this, but is it prudent? How will additional large amounts of debt exclusions affect the town's credit rating and our overall capacity to borrow at the current rates we're borrowing at? Meaning we don't just have one project before us. I'm envisioning upwards of $100 million in need for the town over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. How does that play out as far as prudency goes, I think is my real question. Thank you.
Well, the issue of debt affordability is really subjective. We've done some affordability studies, and it comes down to, you know, what can you afford? I mean, you have to really look at what does affording the debt service do to everything else about the service delivery in the town. And that's why it's important to take a look at the 5-year operating projection of revenues, expenditures, including capital, debt service on capital, and figure out how you can afford what you want to do. And it might mean that you have to take longer. I don't know if it's 10 years or 15 years. I mean, there's a lot of people right now that are taking a look at multiple large projects. A lot of the projects are big right now, and people are generally having to do them with debt exclusions, and there's only so much appetite for debt exclusions. So you kind of have to, get the devil's in the detail on this. I hate to use that term, but it really is, in terms of looking at the future. You have to look at every category of expenditure and every opportunity for revenue and revenue growth. On one of those pages, there's the growth revenue. You've had about growth revenue of about $1 million a year in each of the years. How do you grow that? How do you make the enterprise funds? And I don't know if they are or not, but are they paying? They're fully paying their way in terms of whatever town services are provided to those enterprise activities. Are the enterprise activities actually paying for that, or are they not? I mean, you have to really evaluate all that. You can get there. It takes a while to get there and figure it all out. And one of the things that has to be done is prioritize the capital projects. I mean, there's a wish list, but if everybody's got a wish list a mile long, half the wish list is not needed. And I think that, you have to prioritize what you want. You don't want to fritter away what you can do on stuff that's really not needed when, in fact, you've got a bigger priority that you really want. And maybe that's the big elephant in the room. You got to figure out how can you address the big elephant in the room, or can't you, or when can you? You really have to look at it. But you want to afford it and structure it so that you don't lose your credit rating in the process. And so that's typically how we structure debt, to make sure it's not going to undermine. I have not seen the rating agency downgrade anyone because of the volume of debt. And they've even asked somebody recently where they wanted to spend a couple extra $100 million on top of a couple $100 million of project costs. And because of the wealth of that particular community, that wouldn't in itself undermine the AAA, but it's possible if they kept on going with something that the next thing like that would. It's subjective, and a lot of it does have to do with the willingness to pay and the capacity to pay and what that does, But usually people won't vote for something if they can't pay for it, if they don't want to pay for it.
Thank you. You can go on to that one. I promised myself I wasn't going to forget people online, and I immediately forgot everybody who might be online. So I see Ms. Colburn has raised her hand. I'm not sure if we're able to get audio in the room from there. Mr. Tisdale, do you know if you're able to? Otherwise, I just want to give her the opportunity to write out a question if she's not able to actually be heard. Okay, Ms. Colburn, we recognize you. If you don't mind writing your question in the chat, then we will. I'll give the mic to Mr. Tisdale, and he'll read your question for you. Thank you very much. So, who else do we have? Anybody else over here looking for a question? Over here. 1 second.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I appreciate it. So I have two quick questions. One, does all the revenue on the cherry sheet contribute to our debt capacity? And the second question is does our 10% debt cap against our general fund include inside and outside debt?
Well, I take the cherry sheet is your estimate of revenues, right?
The cherry sheet, if I may, has nothing to do with the debt. It's our total revenues that come into the town.
Right, all the
It's one
local
pocket.
receipts and everything else.
Yes, it's one
Yeah.
pocket of revenue.
So what was the question about the cherry sheet, though? Does it contribute to your debt? So it's
Does it contribute to the debt capacity at all?
well, all of the revenues contribute to your capacity to spend. You got all your revenues, including the tax levy, which is limited, is what affords your expenditures. So on the recap, so at town meeting, all you're required to do is vote and approve the budget. You don't have to approve the revenues. People don't really see the revenues until they go to set the tax rate and the tax rate recapitulation sheet, which covers all of the estimated revenues available to the town, and then all of the expenditure requirements of the town, and whatever is shortfall is the tax levy, but it has to balance out with the amount of taxes that you can levy. So that's how the cherry sheet fits in. It's all the revenue estimates. And in terms of the other question, the 5 and 10% debt limits, if debt is outside the debt limit, it doesn't count against either one of those. So all that self-supporting debt is outside the 5%, and it's outside the 10. The only way you can go to 10% is if you get the state municipal finance oversight board to approve you going over 5%. I can't remember going to get the double debt limit, which is the 10%. I don't remember ever trying to get that from the state. They can approve it, but most people aren't even close to the 5% debt limit because so many debt capital projects are for purposes that are not subject to the 5% limit. So
The next question we're going to take is from Ms. Colburn. Microphone.
Okay, Ms. Colburn is asking, is my takeaway correct that she would like us to not use free cash to balance the budget and also to increase our debt? If so, we don't use free cash for borrowing either. Does that mean we shouldn't increase taxes because we'd have too much free cash?
I think I might need to hear that question again, or see it.
I can repeat it.
Okay.
It says, is my takeaway correct that she would like us to not use free cash to balance the budget?
Stop with that. I'm suggesting that the rating agency would give you more credit if you would whittle yourself off the use of free cash to balance the budget.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Okay.
really, I don't want to tell the town what they should do. I want to tell the town how different decisions impact the town.
So part two of that says, if so, and we don't use free cash for borrowing, either does that mean we shouldn't increase taxes because we'd have too much free cash?
Well, I think that maybe what that question's getting at, you use free cash for direct capital outlay, and some of that amount of free cash that's used to balance the budget is for direct capital outlay, where you pay for a project, you don't bond it, you just pay for it. I think that you need to, and when you develop fiscal policies which are in the works, there should be a consideration as to how much do you pay for direct capital outlay? How much can you afford to pay for direct capital outlay? We do, at the time that you issue debt, talk about, of the free cash that's being appropriated to balance the budget, how much of it is being used for direct capital outlay. Maybe, especially in an low interest rate environment where you can borrow money for 20 years. Well, we're in a relatively low interest rate environment. Right now, if you issued a 1-year note, you'd probably pay 4%. If you issued a 20-year bond, you'd probably pay 3.5%. 3.5% is a great rate for 20-year bonds. A couple of years ago, we saw 20-year debt at probably 1.5%. That's the time to issue debt. You know, I mean, and you can use short-term debt to get over a bad market condition. You can roll notes, and I didn't give the definition of that, but you just take out the note, you keep renewing it every year without paying back principal. You can do that for 3 years, and you can roll it another 7 years if you needed to put it with other debt or to design how you want to bring on all of what you're trying to accomplish without having any negative impacts on operations or on the credit. The last thing you want to do is undermine the credit in the process of trying to issue too much debt or more debt.
Thank you. Do you have a question? Sorry. I'm just going to get you just.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
I was a little alarmed by your statement that said that we have the capacity to double our debt limit, which sounded like it's something really easy. But I think this is a problem. And I was watching a school committee meeting in March, and I thought I heard them say that our finances are going off a cliff next year. Is that true? I have one more question after that.
Well, your finances are going off a cliff. You're in a good financial position. I'm not suggesting you draw down on your reserve position. I'm suggesting you figure out how you can do what you want to do with everything that you have to accomplish. So debt is only part of the total picture. I mean, you have to pay for school operations and police and fire and DPW. So your finances aren't going over a cliff. you're at the levy limit of Prop 2.5 under the lower levy limit. You're not just, debt is only part of what you might exclude from that limit. Maybe you would exclude, maybe you have to take a look at what your operations are. Maybe your operating costs need to wean yourself off the use of free cash for operations. You have to look at how much of that free cash you're appropriating each year is for capital versus how much is for non-capital, that's recurring expenditures. Wean yourself off that over some reasonable amount of time and try to, it's this picture.
Okay.
It's all of this at the same time you have to work on.
But this is what worries me. We're all talking about debt. We can get more debt. We can do this. We can use our free cash. But what's not being discussed is how this is going to affect the taxpayer. If we turn to your page 8. Oh, I'm sorry. You turn to page 8
Yep.
of your spreadsheet. Our yearly tax increases, just reading the first 5 years, are going to increase by 400, 400, 400, 420, and 725. And then it goes on 725 for a long time after that. People are going to be paying, they're paying what, $6,500 to $7,500 taxes on a $500,000 house? That's going to go beyond $10,000 in taxes. There are a lot of people that are retired and can't afford that.
Mr. Cavey.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, did I interpret that correctly?
No.
Are those numbers yearly increases in taxes?
No, it's the same tax for starters. What we wanted to show you was, well, let me start with your first statement that isn't correct. I'm not saying you have the capacity. I'm saying under state law, you could issue debt. State law would allow you to issue a lot more debt than you're probably ever going to want to issue, for sure. Under the lower debt limit, which is 5%, they call it the normal debt limit, as opposed to the 10% businesses, the double debt limit. Those are defined by state law. You can't issue more than 5% of your equalized valuation under the normal debt limit. But so much of your debt that you do want to issue is outside and not counted against that. I'm only telling you what that is because people confuse the debt limit with debt exclusions. The debt exclusions have to do with the tax levy. Debt limit has to do with how much bonding you can authorize. What the page that you're referencing on page 8, the only reason we're showing it is exactly your point. That's what a school would cost. A $66 million, a local share of a $114 million project. If it's $66 million, we're showing you what $66 million would cost. I'm not saying you should do it. I don't know if you should do it. Your town has to decide if you want to do it. But we're showing you what it would cost. And it would cost $700 at a certain point when it was actually issued as debt, as long-term bonds. It would take the amount of taxes you're levying for the existing high school, this new middle school, and the fire station, the part that's excluded. It would jump up to the average $500,000 home would be paying $700 a year.
In addition to every other year.
Every single year of the bond, all 30 years. Yeah, and you can see it here. It's not the whole time because some of the debt is going to fall off. The high school is going to fall off. And then the fire station will fall off.
Mr. Cavey.
The school would come on and it would pay. So you can see it goes $700 a year, but then it drops down to $377 a year for the remaining term of that middle school.
Elementary school.
Elementary school, sorry.
Mr. Cavey, just a point of clarification,
Yes,
if I
sir.
may. And if I don't generally interpret what the school committee says, and if I'm wrong, I will apologize to them. I did hear the comment about the fiscal cliff. They were referring, I believe, to the operating budget, not to the cost of debt to build a new school. So I don't want to mislead anybody. We have a Proposition 2.5 ceiling. So we can only increase, we're limited in increasing taxes by 2.5% over the levy plus new growth. The operating budget at 7.1 and the town budget at 3.8 puts us right up against that levy, right up against that limit, that spending limit. If we went any higher than that, we'd be exceeding our Prop 2.5 constraints, so we didn't, and we won't. with respect to, I want to make sure in defense of this project, of the project you referenced, that $700 a month is, correct me if I'm wrong, is not the cost of the new school. That's the combined 3 investments that were made for the high school, for the fire department, and for the South School. So it's not incremental $700. It's what the total of the increase would be for a $500,000 home for those 3 projects combined. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. And so I just, before we're going to move on, but I want to see anybody who's online, if you don't mind just raising your hand so that we know you have a question. But otherwise, I'll keep on asking. We'll do questions inside the Great Hall. Mr. Ventresco.
Hi, Peter Ventresco. I don't know if you can answer the question, but when did we get off the roll of the MWRA deficit? The debt. We had a 20-year debt that we had to pay back the MWRA for the water hookup. When did we roll off of that debt? When was it finished?
Oh, I'd have to, what? We were thinking maybe 2021.
2021?
That's what they're thinking.
All right, so how much was the last cash payment we got from them?
I think we're asking, you're getting into the details of a particular transaction. I don't know if they'll know this off the top of their head.
I would probably have to, yeah, I don't.
Pardon, I don't hear you.
I would have to check into that. I don't know the answer to that offhand.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Cavey, if I may?
Yes.
That's outside the scope of the presentation. They have no inkling as to what we collect or when we collect it. If the resident would like to direct that question to me tomorrow, I'd be more than happy to assist them with the answer.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Mr. Laurie.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. I enjoyed it. First of all, I think to a previous speaker about the cherry sheet, I think, you know, cherry sheet is a revenue source to pay for the general fund, and we're measuring our ability and our capacity based on how much we have in our general fund. So the question is do the items that we spend from the cherry sheet actually get paid into a general fund that you measure in terms of our capacity to borrow for debt service? I think that might be another way to ask the same question.
Mr. Cavey, if I may answer that one. Again, that's out of the purview of our presenters this evening. Just the revenue, we have one bucket of revenue which includes all cherry sheet, all local receipts, and all taxation for the general operating of the town.
It's a source of revenue for the general fund that we're measured for our debt service, correct?
And it's not necessarily measured for debt service. All revenue contributes to every single aspect of the budget,
Okay.
be it debt service, school, general government.
Thank you. In 2017, when the high school was bonded as a bundle, the bond market came to our select board and said, we need you to sign a policy that puts a cap of 10% on your general fund to borrow. They put a cap on it. That's not the same thing as the 5 and 10% that was cited earlier in terms of what the state laws were. But there is a document, I've read it. There's a 10% maximum amount of debt service you're allowed to have in your town against your general fund. It says it.
I'm not sure. I think that might be referring to what I was saying. You've got 2.5% debt service as a percent of your whole general fund budget right now.
Which is leading to my next question. I just wanted to make sure, I just wanted to make the context not about the state law, but about the policy that our select board made.
Well, okay, that's what that was, a policy of the select board.
Correct.
So, and I said most towns have between 5 and 10%, but I don't think
We have a
that's
10%.
Okay.
But it starts at 0. There's no floor to that. So you did mention in your presentation that many towns try to hold the line on debt service inside the budget so you don't have to claw your way back into some debt because your operating budget is absorbing all the general fund. If you go down to 0, you have nothing available to borrow inside your.
You can't really go down to 0. You've got to appropriate debt service for what you've already issued, for all the debt you've already issued. And as you
Right.
authorize more debt, you have to appropriate the debt service for that.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out how to fit it all inside the lower levy limit of Prop 2.5.
in a few years ago, we used to be over 4.5% of our general fund. And in your on page 5, you do a nice job of illustrating how that's dropped to only 2.5,
Right.
2.49. And it looks like the entire debt service of the town is 8.9, or let's say $9 million of debt service for the town. And 1/3 of that is inside the budget, 2/3 is outside, correct? Is that a fair assessment? Or is that also putting in the enterprise money and the
No, that's all the
CPA?
enterprise money and the CPA.
All right.
You can see the separate funds on an earlier page.
Right, do you have the number offhand of what outside versus inside, separating out enterprise, CPA, et cetera, et cetera?
On the debt statement, we show you the, do we have that? I don't think we've got it.
Inside versus outside, excluding those things that are irrelevant, that are self-sustaining debt.
No, but what are you wanting to
You
try to
got
understand?
you had the limit. He's telling me I have a limit. I just want to understand that if we're at 2.5%,
But the
that-
2.5%
could it-
doesn't have anything to
could
do
it-
with what's inside or outside the debt
Well,
limit.
that 2.5 could actually go up higher. We have room to go up higher on that number to 4 or 5% easily, and that would add $2 million of debt inside the budget, correct?
Yeah, but the problem with that is that what are you going to do about all the other budget categories? You'd have to cut them. You've only got $57,000 left under the lower levy limit. You'd have to cut something. You're right up against what you're spending uses up everything but the 2.5% that's being used for debt service. Does that make sense?
Okay. You have additional questions on this side? I only see one in the back. I think this might be the last question, unless anybody has a question online.
Steve Wilkinson. I think from what you said that free cash comes from reserves. Is that correct?
No, free cash is a part of the reserve. So under Massachusetts law, there's a term, free cash and stabilization. Those two amounts together are pretty much under GAAP accounting basis, make up unassigned fund balance. In Massachusetts, free cash, it's not free and it's not cash. It's the amount of money that the state certifies is available to be appropriated for one purpose or another. And so free cash is part of your reserves. You're part of your reserve position. You've got free cash, you've got a number of stabilization funds, and those are all your reserves.
What do we have in reserves currently?
Oh, gosh, you've got a lot. You've got a nice reserve position. It's
So-
the reason why you're AA, too.
If I may, Mr. Cavey, as kind of a simpler term, if you'd like, free cash is the amount of money each year, surplus money left over from municipal operations.
Okay.
So by way of example, we have billings to Medicare of almost $2.5 million a year for ambulance service. That's not in the budget. So at the end of the year, that money goes to free cash, which we generally use for smaller capital investments, a car, a truck, a backhoe, not a large project.
Your free cash,
Or used to plug a hole in the budget. Now, we've lowered that by almost 70% over the previous year, using free cash in the operating budget, and we've contributed 3 times the normal amount to the stabilization fund in the fiscal '25 budget. So over the last 24 months, we've become extremely conservative. So the money that spins off of municipal operations, surplus money, it's not spent, is certified as free cash. That can be used at town meeting to make smaller capital items without borrowing money.
Okay.
In addition to that, free cash has been used over the last 5, 6, 7 years, maybe longer, to balance the budget. We've weaned ourselves off that use of free cash and policies. I think in this year's budget, we've gone from 21 million in free cash, 200 and, excuse me, 2.3 to 1.7 to this year about 600,000.
Okay.
So by the end of fiscal '25, we will have a budget without using any free cash.
Okay.
It's a very conservative approach based on a policy by the Select Board and the FinCom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just add at July 1, 23, you had $4.9 million of free cash. Yeah, well, you had free cash of 5.6 million at July 1, 21, 5.1 million at July 1, 22, and 4.9 million at July 1, 23. Sure.
Okay, we have one final question online. I don't believe there's anybody else who had a question here. But Mr. Tisdale, will you please read the question that Armando Barboza?
Yes, I have
Just need
a
a
question.
microphone.
If the goal was to only increase the bond debt, what is the three greatest impact, or what can the town do? The three possible impact that would have the greatest impact on increasing the bond. I don't know if I phrased that correctly, but
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. What would be the, what?
what three things can the town do today to increase the bond rating if the goal is only to increase the bond rating?
Oh, the rating? Probably to develop plans for its future and how it can afford what it wants to do. Finish, prioritizing the capital plan. Complete the fiscal policy review and come up with fiscal policies that the town can live with. And come up with a projection of operations that would show how you can afford what it is that you want to do.
So it's planning, planning, and planning?
Planning, planning, and planning is definitely the mantra these days, in addition to structural balance.
Thank you.
Perfect. And that concludes the section. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Can I say one last thing? I just want to thank my colleagues. Abby Jeffers put together a lot of this work that I got to talk about. And Megan Highland has worked with Abby and me to provide all the services that we try to give the town. Thanks. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for all of you coming tonight, and for those at home for watching. We hope this was informative. Have a good night.